Imagine you could predict the next move in a war, using a simulation that's been running for 20 years. Well, today, we're going to look at one for the conflict with Iran and break down exactly what it's telling us.
A trap of our own making. Yeah, those are some heavy words, right? They come from Professor Robert Pape, and he's not just some random expert. This is a guy who's been advising the White House on this exact scenario for 2 decades. And he's basically saying this whole thing is spiraling, and we are losing our grip. And look, when we say he's an expert, we mean it. This isn't just some guy in an ivory tower. Professor Pape literally built the training curriculum for the U.S. Air Force for this exact kind of conflict. He's been in the room advising every administration since 2001, Republicans and Democrats. And here's the kicker. His predictions have been spot on for 20 years. So yeah, when he talks, people tend to listen.
Okay, so let's get into it. What is this trap he's talking about? Well, it all kicks off with what looks like a massive, massive intelligence failure.
16. That's the number. The one that keeps military planners and strategists awake at night. Iran has enough enriched uranium for 16 nuclear bombs. But here's the real problem, the one that changes everything. The U.S. has no idea where it is. None of it.
So you see, the U.S. launched these incredibly precise smart bomb attacks, and on paper, it looked like a huge success. The buildings were destroyed just as planned. A tactical victory, right? Well, no, not at all, because the goal was never about blowing up buildings. It was about getting that nuclear material. And get this, satellite images show trucks moving big containers out of those facilities just days before the strikes hit. The material was already gone.
In this whole situation, this huge misstep, it all comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy, a complete misreading of how the Iranian regime actually operates.
This is where Pape's analysis gets really fascinating. He uses this brilliant analogy. He says the U.S. looks at Iran and sees a Jenga tower. A brittle structure where if you just pull out one key piece, like the leader, the whole thing's going to come crashing down. But that's the myth. The reality, he says, is that it's more like an adaptive matrix. It's resilient. You take a piece out, it doesn't collapse. It just adapts. It fills the hole, and often the piece that fills it is even stronger and way more aggressive than the last one.
And here's a perfect example of that in action. A U.S. strike took out the supreme leader. The idea was to decapitate the regime, right? But it completely backfired. The leader who was killed had actually issued religious edicts, fatwas, against making nuclear weapons. His son, who stepped right in to replace him, is way more aggressive and has 0 of those reservations. And if that wasn't bad enough, the same strike also took out a whole pool of 20 to 30 potential successors, many of whom were more moderate. So the U.S. essentially cleared the path for a hardliner.
So this huge miscalculation, this misreading of the situation, it locks the United States into what Professor Pape calls the escalation trap. And he says it unfolds in 3 pretty predictable stages.
Okay, so let's walk through it. First, you get a tactical success that's actually a strategic failure. Then comes horizontal escalation, and finally, you get a ground war with global blowback.
All right, stage 1. This is the tactical success, strategic failure part we've been talking about. The U.S. bombs hit their targets perfectly, but the nuclear material is already long gone. So it's a strategic disaster. And what happens next? Iran doesn't just fold. No way. They lash back hard. They hit Israel with missiles, sending 3,000 people to the hospital, the most since the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It's an immediate and painful response.
This brings us to stage 2, horizontal escalation. The initial plan isn't working, so Iran changes the game. Instead of escalating vertically like a direct fight with the U.S., they go horizontally. What does that mean? They use their super accurate drones to hit the U.S. coalition partners, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But they're not just hitting military targets, they're going after their economies, tourism, airports, oil facilities. The goal is to make it so painful for America's allies that they're forced to say, "Get out, we don't want you here anymore."
And all of this leads to the most dangerous phase, stage 3. The nuclear material is still missing. The political pressure back in the U.S. becomes immense. So what's the next logical step? Sending in ground troops to go find it? And Pape's simulations are pretty clear on this. That would almost certainly trigger a massive wave of suicide terrorism. Then the conflict goes global. You've got the Strait of Hormuz, a critical oil choke point, getting disrupted. Suddenly, gas prices around the world are going through the roof.
Okay, so that's the trap. Given this clear 3-stage pattern, what does Pape predict is most likely to happen next?
And his forecast is, well, it's pretty sobering. He puts the chance of this whole thing escalating to a full-blown stage 3 ground war at 75%.
And a diplomatic deal? Just a 25% chance. So why is he so sure it's headed in the wrong direction?
Well, it comes down to this absolutely crucial paradox. The actions taken by the U.S. have actually created the very outcome they were trying to prevent. Think about it from Iran's point of view. Their leaders are being targeted, their facilities are being bombed, so what's their best way to survive? It's to have a nuclear weapon. The U.S. has basically taken away any incentive they had not to build one. Why wouldn't they, at this point?
And that leaves the White House in an incredibly tough spot. There are no good options left. There's no golden off-ramp, no easy way out of this that ends in a clean political win.
In fact, they're facing what's called a Hobsonian choice. You might not have heard that term, but it's basically the illusion of a choice when there really isn't one. It's a take it or leave it situation, or in this case, a choice between two really, really undesirable options.
So, here are the two paths on the table. Option A is to cut your losses. Just stop the bombing campaign now, pull back your forces, and accept a small but certain political defeat. It'll sting, but it's contained. Option B is to double down. Keep escalating, keep pushing, hoping for a better outcome, but risking a catastrophic Vietnam-level political failure, the kind that can haunt an administration for decades.
And that's the question that hangs over this entire crisis. Do you take a small, certain defeat right now, or do you risk a much, much bigger one later? It's a choice no leader ever wants to make, but it's the one that will decide how this whole thing plays out.